Chapter 1. A Childhood in Shadows. Daniel was born in a small, quiet town where dreams often got lost between the rusted fences and broken sidewalks. His house stood at the end of a dirt road, a place that should have held warmth and laughter, but didn't. His father, Mr. Grant, was a man hardened by life. After Daniel's mother passed away when he was just 4 years old, the man who once smiled began to frown at the world. Mr. Grant worked as a mechanic and drank too much. The alcohol didn't just numb his pain, it erased his gentleness. Every night, Daniel would sit alone in his room with a flashlight under the blanket, reading stories from borrowed books. It was his escape. One day, at school, Daniel's teacher asked the class to write a story. Most kids wrote about dogs or superheroes. Daniel wrote about a bird trapped in a cage who taught itself to sing. Her teacher was stunned. She read it aloud to the class. Some laughed, others clapped. But Daniel, he smiled for the first time in weeks. When he came home, he proudly showed his father the story. Mr. Grant barely looked at it. "Stories don't feed you," he muttered. Then he tore the paper in two. That night, Daniel cried quietly into his pillow. But deep inside, a spark had been lit. He promised himself, "One day, I'll write a story the whole world will read." Chapter 2. Fire and Ashes. Daniel grew older, and so did the silence between him and his father. Mr. Grant never hit him, but his words could cut like glass. "You think the world cares about your silly poems?" he'd say. "Go fix something real." By now, Daniel had turned 12 and had filled 3 notebooks with stories and poems. He kept them hidden under a loose floorboard in his bedroom. Writing became his friend, his teacher, his mother, and his escape. One night, after a particularly harsh argument, Mr. Grant found the notebooks. He flipped through the pages, scowling. "Garbage," he hissed. "You waste your time." Before Daniel could stop him, his father walked outside and threw all the notebooks into a metal barrel behind the house. With a match and a bitter heart, he set them on fire. Daniel screamed. He ran toward the flames, trying to save the burning pages, but they turned to ash, piece by piece. His stories, his heart, were gone. "I hate you," Daniel shouted, tears streaming down his face. Mr. Grant didn't answer. He just went back inside. From that night on, Daniel stopped speaking to his father. But he didn't stop writing. Chapter 3. The Secret Library. High school was no easier. Daniel kept to himself. He was the quiet boy in the back of the room, the one with ink stains on his fingers and daydreams in his eyes. Most students ignored him, except for one, Mrs. Rivera, the school librarian. She noticed how Daniel lingered after school, how he copied poems from old books into his worn notebook. One day, she handed him a blank journal. "You have a voice," she said. "Use it." That journal became Daniel's treasure. He wrote daily, about grief, about hope, about a boy who wanted to fly. Mrs. Rivera entered one of his stories into a national youth writing competition without telling him. 2 months later, Daniel received a letter in the mail. He had won first place. The prize? A scholarship to a writing summer camp in the city. It was the first time someone outside his small world told him, "You matter." He packed his bag quietly and left a note on the kitchen table. "Gone to learn how to fly." His father never replied. But Daniel didn't care. He was already gone. Chapter 4. The First Step. City life was loud and fast, but Daniel loved it. At the writing camp, he met other kids who dreamed on paper. They weren't mocked, they were celebrated. For the first time, Daniel stood on a stage and read his story aloud. His hands shook, but his voice was steady. The story was about a boy who rebuilt his wings from broken feathers. When he finished, the room was silent. Then came applause, long, warm, and real. That night, under unfamiliar stars, Daniel cried, not from sadness, but from hope. He returned home with a plan. He would finish school, apply for scholarships, and leave the town forever. He worked part-time jobs, studied hard, and kept writing. Each rejection letter from publishers didn't break him, it shaped him. At 18 years old, he left for the city again, this time for university. His father didn't come to say goodbye. But Daniel wasn't surprised. Chapter 5. Years of Silence. University life was difficult. Daniel felt like a small voice in a sea of louder ones. The city was overwhelming at times, and while he had escaped the pain of his childhood home, he carried it with him. He missed his mother deeply, and even though he tried not to think of his father, sometimes he would see a man at a bus stop or in a workshop and freeze for a moment. He worked multiple jobs, dishwasher, bookstore clerk, freelance editor, to pay for tuition and rent. At night, he studied until his eyes burned and wrote in the early hours when everything was quiet. His writing matured. His words became sharper, more honest, more alive. One of his professors noticed his work and encouraged him to submit to journals. Daniel received more rejection letters than he could count, but once in a while there was a yes. A small poem in a literary blog, a short story in a youth magazine. Then came his big break. A collection of his short stories was accepted by a respected independent publisher. He called the collection The Kingdom of Light, named after the stories he once wrote as a child. The book didn't explode immediately, but it grew slowly. Reviewers called it achingly beautiful. Readers shared quotes on social media. Teachers recommended it to students. Years passed. Daniel graduated. He wrote more, published more. Eventually, his name began to appear on bestseller lists. But even then, he still dreamed of something he hadn't yet found. Peace. Chapter 6. Fame and Distance. Daniel was now a respected author. He traveled to book fairs, spoke at conferences, and even gave lectures at universities. People lined up to get their books signed. Yet every time someone asked, "Tell us about your childhood," he gave the same answer: "It made me who I am." But inside, a hollow space still echoed. He thought of his father more often now, not with hate, but with quiet questions. Did he still live in that house at the end of the dirt road? Was he proud, regretful, alive? One evening, Daniel received a message from Ms. Rivera. "Your father came by the school. He asked about you." Daniel stared at the message for a long time. Then he turned off his phone and sat in silence. Chapter 7. The Letter. Months passed before Daniel wrote back. It wasn't a letter of love. It wasn't a letter of hate. It was honest. "I don't know if you remember the stories you burned, but I still do. Every word, every page. I rebuilt them from ashes." Weeks later, an envelope arrived at his apartment. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was rough. "I was wrong. I am sorry. I read your book twice." Daniel held the letter in his hand, shaking. He reread it 10 times. He didn't know what he felt. Not yet. Chapter 8. Home Again. Daniel hadn't seen the town in 15 years. The roads were older, quieter. The house looked smaller. Mr. Grant opened the door slowly. He looked thinner, grayer, but his eyes were softer. They didn't hug, they didn't cry, they just stood there. "Tea?" Mr. Grant asked. Daniel nodded. Over the next few days, they spoke little, but when they did, it was gentle. Mr. Grant apologized again. He showed Daniel an old metal box under his bed. Inside were newspaper clippings, printed interviews, and every book Daniel had ever published. "I bought them all," he whispered. "I didn't know how to say I was proud." Chapter 9. Mending. They began to walk together in the mornings. Mr. Grant showed Daniel the new tools in his garage. Daniel shared a few stories he hadn't published yet. One day, Mr. Grant asked, "Do you think it's too late to start over?" Daniel looked at him. "No," he said. "Stories can begin again." They didn't talk about the fire, but they didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer filled with anger, but with understanding. Chapter 10. Light. Daniel returned to the city, but now he visited the town often. At a book event, someone asked, "What's your greatest success?" Daniel thought for a moment. "Forgiveness and a cup of tea with my father." The audience applauded, but Daniel didn't hear them. He was remembering the boy with the burned stories and the man who finally chose the light. Thanks for watching. Take action today, not tomorrow. Press subscribe. And let's keep learning together. You're doing great. See you in the next one. Stay strong.